House Republican leader John Boehner of Ohio. So, first up, Leader Boehner, what's your reaction to this full-scale attack by Mr. Obama?
Well, I really think it shows how out of touch the White House is. Instead of working on getting the economy going again and getting people back to work, the White House has panicked over what I've got to say. Listen, I think it's time for us to work together to cut spending and to reduce the uncertainty that this administration continues to lay out in front of employers in America.
You know, John, I want to read you one more thing from the Politico.com today. Quote, "They talk about me like a dog," Obama said of his political opponents. Quote, "That's not in my prepared remarks, but it's true." End quote. What's he talking about?
Well, I don't know. I don't have any personal animosity toward the president. I told the president, as a matter of fact, on the day of his inauguration, that if I was in agreement with his policies, I'd be the first one out there and supporting them. And if I was opposed to them, he'd know about it. When he announced his Iraq plan, his Afghanistan plan, I was one of the first to be out there supporting what he was doing. But when he started all the stimulus spending, the budget that's out of control, and all of the other proposals coming out of this administration, I've been a chief critic of his. Because I disagree with these policies just like a majority of the American people do.
All right, so, Mr. Leader, yesterday Mr. Obama unveiled a $50 billion infrastructure spending program, including an infrastructure bank. Can you support that?
Well, I don't think the American people want any more stimulus spending coming out of Washington. This is another short-term spending measure. And if he's really serious about fixing the infrastructure, why wouldn't he have worked with the Congress to pass a highway bill with a funding mechanism to take care of the infrastructure in America? A 5- or 6-year highway bill that would have provided certainty for small businesses and contractors around the country, actually allowed them to plan and to bid on work, rather than these short-term measures that frankly have done nothing to put our people back to work.
How about the 100% write-off for business investment for 1 year? Can you support that?
You know, Larry, I'm not necessarily opposed to this, but I think the White House is missing the big point here. Until we get spending under control and we reduce the uncertainty that's coming out of this administration, whether it's cap and trade, card check, the coming tax increases, until we do those two things, we're not going to allow employers the openness to make plans and go invest. And I think it's these big issues that the president really needs to focus on.
John, you know, a lot of people want to know, if the Republicans win, take the House, maybe the Senate, will you have a true pro-growth, pro-jobs plan? Will you stop the war on business? Will you stop the war on investors?
Larry, as you're probably aware, I used to run a small business. I owned a small business before I got into this political arena. I understand what business people in America are dealing with. And I've got to tell you that if we're going to solve the deficit problem, we need to get our arms around the out-of-control spending. We need to eliminate the uncertainty that this administration's proposing and allow the job creation engine in America, the free enterprise system, the opportunity to succeed. I came to Washington because I thought the government was choking the goose that was laying the golden egg, and I can tell you that I've never seen the government choking the goose harder than it is right now.
All right, so in your Cleveland speech of your own before the City Club last week, you had 5 major points. You mentioned one of them, extending the Bush tax cuts, stop the job-killing tax hikes on small business and investors. I want to ask you about one you mentioned, a $1.3 trillion spending reduction plan, which I think was first authored by Paul Ryan, who might be your budget chairman. Can you tell us about this spending reduction?
Well, I think it's important that we get our arms around the out-of-control spending in Washington. We laid out $1.3 trillion worth of spending reductions, Paul Ryan, Eric Cantor, myself, and the Budget Committee members, as a good place to start. We can start with all of the unspent stimulus money. We can start with, how about no more stimulus spending? How about the TARP money that's being repaid? Let's make sure it goes to the Treasury to pay down the debt. These would be big steps that really would send a signal to the private sector that Washington's serious about getting spending under control.
And, John, what about your own platform and agenda more formally? There's a lot of talk the Republicans will unveil some kind of new contract with America, such as you had in 1994 when you were a senior lieutenant in those days. People want to know, is it going to be a Tea Party-based agenda? When will it come out? What might it look like?
Well, Larry, we expect to unveil something later on in September. But let's understand, these will be the first steps, our first priorities. We've been listening to the American people over the last year. We've heard them loud and clear. They want something done about jobs. They want something done about spending. These are the two big issues on the minds of the American people, and these and others will be addressed in our coming platform.
Will you have constitutional limits, for example, as proposed by the Tea Party's contract from America?
I believe that if Congress is going to pass a law, it ought to be required to cite the specific part of the Constitution that allows it to occur.
And will you have pro-growth tax reform? You know, you mentioned getting rid of a lot of tax exemptions and deductions and special carve-outs in your Cleveland speech. Will we see a pro-growth flat tax reform in the Republican agenda?
I think we'll see some parts of it. But remember, Larry, this was first priorities, first step. This isn't intended to be some long-term governing platform. We want to make it clear to the American people what we expect to do early on in this Congress to make sure that that they've got a clear view of who we are, what we're all about. But I can tell you, as you look further down the legislative path, Republicans in Washington believe that we've got to have a strong economy with more Americans working, taking care of themselves and their own families, and paying taxes if we're actually going to close the budget hole.
And Mr. Boehner, last one for you, sir. On January 3rd, if you take office as Speaker, what would your first action be? What would your first policy action be?
Well, one of the first things we have to do is to adopt a set of rules for the House. Every 2 years, the rules expire. You have to re-adopt the rules. And I think that rules package will be it'll be voted on that day. And you'll see more openness, transparency, and accountability in the Congress more than we've ever seen in the history of our institution. And I'll make it clear that if we're serious about taking on the big problems that face our country, we've got to find a way to peel away the scar tissue that exists between the two parties. Because you look back through our history, big things don't happen on a partisan vote. We got to find some way to work together to address the concerns of the American people, and we will.
All right, Republican House Leader John Boehner, we thank you very much for your time, sir.
Thank you, Larry.
All right, a quick programming note. The Free Market 12-Step Path to Prosperity special continues tomorrow when we'll focus on housing with FDIC Chair Sheila Bair. That'll be right here, 7 p.m. Eastern. Now, coming up this evening, President Obama finally gets on the right side of one key tax issue. We're going to tell you all about it. And our dynamic duo, Bob Rice and Steve Moore, will join me to debate more on the 12-step recovery plan focusing on taxes.